IVM.
Is the Indian economy doing all right? Is it suffering from something worse than the painful effects of demonetization? Is 2017 the beginning of a new chapter between India and Afghanistan? Join us on this episode of the Pragati podcast for all this and more. We are your hosts, Pavan, Srinath and Hamsini, Hariharan. It's an in-house episode today. My Takshashila colleagues Anupam, Manur and Pranay Kotasthane will be joining us today. Anupam's a fellow at the Takshashila Institution and a core economics faculty. He'll be talking about the Indian economy today, 3 years after the Modi government took over. Second half, we are joined by Pranay, who heads the geostrategy program at Takshashila. Pranay will be talking to us about something that he has written for several years on, which is about India and Afghanistan. The American President Trump made some interesting comments recently about a new Afghanistan policy, and this envisages a larger role for India. Pranay will be coming in and talking to us about whether this is a good thing and what India can do if it does get a larger mandate in Afghanistan. Today on the Pragati podcast, I'm here with my colleague Hamsini and my colleague Anupam Manur. And we want to talk about the economy. Yes, the economy often is boring nowadays, isn't it, Anupam? Do you see a lot of interesting things happening?
It is, I think, very interesting if you're an economist.
Okay.
And it's more than interesting. I think it is extremely disappointing and depressing. Okay.
So along with the post-truth world, sort of, when a few years ago India changed the GDP numbers and the methodology, I mean, a lot of people felt that we entered the realm of, fake news and post-truth, where the numbers didn't sort of add up anymore, didn't make sense. So now that the latest numbers have come out for the first quarter of the 2017 year, that India grew at only 5.7% over the previous year's same quarter. Should we pay much credence to it? Is it really come down? Should we believe the older numbers?
Yes, I think the CSO is still credible and its numbers are credible. The big problem was where in last year when the numbers came out at 7.1%, but then industrial production, everything else was slowing down. The two didn't match up. But I think now the GDP figures are becoming a lot more in tune and in sync with the rest of the economy. Yes, the GDP figures came out at 5.7%, which is kind of disappointing for a lot of people because we did expect it to be around 6.1, 6.2%, which was the same as the last quarter.
Okay.
But to actually have gone down from that is, I think, took a lot of people by surprise.
Okay, so why are we at 5.7%? I mean, there are people who have talked about demonetization and why it has brought us here. And now, I think with GST hitting, also there are some issues, right? I mean, a lot of companies face uncertainty and so on. So is that why we are at 5.7%?
We could have looked at demonetization and GST as the primary causes if this was the only quarter where we had low growth. But if you look at a trend, if you look at, let's say, the past 5 quarters at least, you can see a steady decline. So Q1 of 2016-17, that is just exactly a year ago, we had 7.1% growth, 7.9%, sorry. And then you had 7.5%, and then which came down to 7%. 6.1 and now 5.7. So you can clearly see a downward trend in the growth rate.
That started even before demonetization.
That started way before demonetization. So from the first quarter of 2016 is when the slump really began. So it's not really something of a shocker that now we're at 5.7%. It's just a continuation of a trend.
So what did the Modi government do wrong, Anupam? You have to tell us the real truth.
Well, a lot of things, and it's not just the Modi government. This is what has been building up for quite a number of years. And I think it's before getting into the main reasons of, why, it's important to also look at, which sectors have been hit, how is the economy actually faring?
Fair enough.
Because if it is, let's say, just demonetization, then consumption would be hit. So then you have to look at, is that really the case, or is there other sectors that are being hit? So I'll just quickly run you through some of the sectors that are hit. What is worrying, truly worrying, is that manufacturing has been hit and in a massive scale, right? So manufacturing sector actually just grew by 1.2% this quarter, as against around 10.6 something percent in the previous year. And the last quarter also, it was not that bad. It was 5.3%. So you can see that, 1.2% is the lowest that it's been in the last probably a decade or so, 5 years at least, manufacturing output. The same, as a mirror, index of industrial production has also been quite low. It came out at 1.6% growth,
So
as against about 7%.
Is being made in India right now.
No, the make in India is it's not really happening.
Okay, all right.
And just other things which related to it is the jobs as well, right? People are worried about jobs, and it's instructive to see that the construction sector, which is one of the highest employers of low skill labor, has also fallen massively. Construction sector grew in just about 2%, as against its normal growth rate of about 9 to 10%. So you see that's also a big downfall there. And finally, you can look at mining, again an mass employer at least, that's actually contracted by 0.7%. So it's growing in it's negative.
And this is not related to low oil prices, or might be related a little bit?
No, actually we have passed the commodity price. We had low commodity prices where it would have affected perhaps, but now commodity prices are pretty much back, not in normal territory, but at least it's way better than what it was before.
Okay. So apart from manufacturing and mining, what else? How are other sectors of the economy doing?
So services is pretty much on track. It's contracted, but not contracted. It's fallen a little bit, but not by too much. Okay. So again, we had, let's say, 9% last year, and it's 8.7% this time. So it's not really. This is more like the normal ups and downs. And I think agricultural GVA has fallen. Okay. Now, if I tell you the figures, it wouldn't seem like too much, right? It's fallen from about 2.5% last quarter to about 2.3% this quarter. But I think it's instructive to note that we had good monsoons this time. Mm-hmm. So crop output has been the highest it's been in the last so many years. Okay. Yet it's fallen by 0.2%. And that would probably tell you that, the agriculture related activities such as animal husbandry or food processing units, all of that has actually fallen, and it's dragged down agriculture quite a bit.
Okay. So therefore, really no sector of the economy doing amazingly well. The services seems to be doing, pulling its weight. But so is that linked to all the big numbers that we are hearing about FDI and so on? So it doesn't seem to compute, right? We don't seem to be growing too fast, but we are attracting all this capital from abroad. So why is India so attractive, and how is that not resulting in growth?
Couple of things. So FDI investment is actually just coming into what it tells you is that our overall gross fixed capital formation has been falling steadily over the last 3 or 4 years. And for example, in 2011-12 it was about 34%, and now we're stuck at about 27%.
So unpack this gross capital.
It just means investments.
Okay.
So economists like fancy terms, but it just means investments.
And it's a percentage of the GDP.
It's a percent of GDP. So from about 34%, it's fallen to about 27% now. And that is despite, as you say, FDI coming in record numbers. I think this is the highest it's been again for so many years. So what that tells you is two things, that the FDI that is coming in is actually going into what you call as brownfield projects and not greenfield projects, which just means that they're investing into buying old assets. Mm-hmm. And they're not actually investing into anything new. So it doesn't really count as new investments.
Right.
And then on the other hand, it also tells you that despite FDI, if investments are going down, that means that there's nothing at all that's coming from the domestic sector.
Okay. So Anupam, given that growth rates are so low, even in sectors like construction, isn't this a good time for the government to come in, have more public works, build more highways, build more roads, create more assets, and at the same time some employment?
Ideally, yes. That's what generally is prescribed in terms when private investments are not coming forth, the government should step in. And the government has been doing that. Many economists believe that in the last quarter, the one before this where we just about touched 6.1%. If the government had not invested the amount that it did, it actually invested 17%. Okay. So if it had not, then we would have reached growth rates of about 4%. Right. So they're already doing that. But then the problem with, again, this quarter, it's the same thing. We would have probably had 4 or subpar 4% growth, if not for the government expenditure. Now, what has happened though is that we have kind of maxed out on government expenditure, right? So we've already, in the first 4 months, and this is kind of unprecedented, in the first 4 months, we've already maxed out on, we've already reached about 92% of our fiscal deficit target. Right, which means that we have barely, 8% of the fiscal deficit to play with for the remaining 8 months. So I don't know what the government can actually go ahead and invest in. And it's also kind of instructive to look at what the government is investing in. It's unfortunately the one thing that, all economists actually prescribe against is revenue deficit. And this year, we've already reached 31% excess of our budgetary estimates of revenue deficit. And
so this is basically bill payments and salaries and so on. We're
transfer
not able
payments, yeah.
So basically, this is the 7th pay commission and other things just coming and hitting us at a time when we don't have enough money.
Precisely. So if in fact the government had spent that much on, as you said, public works or something, it would have resulted in some small spurring of growth. But what you have instead is, there's concentration on transfer payments instead of capital expenditure. And capital expenditure at least would have given you the kind of growth that you wanted, right?
And the private sector, I think we've discussed this in a previous podcast, is struggling because they don't have any money to invest, right? Or they have racked up too much debt.
So there's a very, very peculiar problem with the private sector. So there's something called the twin balance sheet problem, right? And you got to look at how banks and private companies are playing out. And on one hand, you have a situation where people are saying that RBI should cut rates because, then banks will lend out to the companies. But then what you have is, on the other hand, companies actually have excess capacity. So they don't even want to borrow money. Even if the banks gave out free money, they wouldn't take it because they have nowhere to invest in. So it's a very peculiar problem that you're actually, dealing with here. So the banks have huge amount of NPAs, which is non-performing assets. So basically a bad balance sheet, right? So they're unwilling to lend. Now, as I said, even if they're willing to lend, private companies are not willing to borrow because they themselves have so much debt. So they don't want to pile on any more debt than they already do, right? And on top of all of that, they're actually sitting on cash, right? So they don't even want to spend what they have. And that's because investor mood is terrible at the moment. Right?
In spite of the FDI coming in.
Yeah, the FDI somehow is a different beast altogether. As I said, they're going into sure assets. They're not taking any risky decisions. They're not investing in anything new, but they're basically racking up the old assets. So it's a different ball game altogether.
Okay. Thanks, Anupam. So basically, my big takeaway from this is, I think so far many of us had the idea that in the era of the Modi government, the economy has been a little meh. It's not doing too well, but not doing too horribly. Maybe we are missing opportunities, but things are by and large moving along. But the picture that you've painted here today says that this is nothing but a crisis. And I think enough people need to wake up to understand that this is a crisis that we're in. The kind of conversations that were happening in, say, 2013, right? About how the entire economy is in hell and we need to fix it. We need someone great to come and fix it. Also, all those conversations are currently missing in the country.
Yeah, I think also the problem is that a lot of the conversation and discourse got kind of derailed by demonetization and GST, right? So many people are attributing the fall in GDP to demonetization and GST rollout, right?
Okay, so then it becomes a short-term phenomenon that we'll climb out.
Yeah, a lot of people are then willing to accept it, saying, okay, one quarter it falls down and it's because of these great things that are coming in, which means that we'll have long-term success. Whereas I'm saying there is no long-term success. This is the picture, right? Because of the underlying it's time we look beyond the short-term crisis, which is the, demon and GST, and actually look at what are the underlying factors. And much of the slowdown in growth is because of the underlying factors. These things will get over it. As many people correctly say, these things can't go on for another couple of years, but the underlying factors won't go anywhere. The government has to do something about it.
Okay. So, but thanks for sort of bringing this back to demonetization. So how bad is it? I mean, so this is how bad we see it, the 5.7% that we've come to. Is this the low and things will get better?
I'm afraid I have some more bad news there.
Okay.
There's this article by Professor Govind Rao, who had clearly said that, that this is just, this is a rosy picture, in fact.
Okay.
That we've got to wait until January next year, where you'll have revised estimates of the budgets.
Right. So the current thing issued is the advanced estimate.
These are the advanced estimates. So when you have the revised estimates, that is when the informal sector data will come in. And that is where demonetization has had a much bigger impact. So you can expect a growth rate much, below 5.7%.
Okay, Anupam. So you painted a bad picture and you're saying it might be looking worse. What do we do now? I think if you were advising the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, what would you suggest?
The first thing is to actually note and acknowledge the urgency of the situation. So, so
the narrative has to be built around that this is a crisis.
This is a crisis, right? And it's also, just to let you know, I mean, this is that rare period when the global growth has actually started recovering. So you had, the financial crisis and so on for a long time, and then now is when the global growth is actually, getting back on its feet. And if we miss this bus, if we kind of miss this gravy train, then we're just not going to get another opportunity again. So this is where we should actually be exporting, whereas our exports have continuously fallen for the last, 4 years.
Where have they vanished? I mean, can someone tell me why the exports have come down? So succinctly?
There are 3 reasons.
Okay.
And one which was given until now was the sluggish global growth that people are not demanding. But that has again vanished. I mean, that reason cannot be stated anymore because global growth is back on its feet.
Okay.
The second reason is that the rupee has been appreciating against the dollar. Okay. So, higher valued rupee against the dollar will mean loss of competitiveness. But the third most important thing is going back into investments, private investments in India.
Okay.
No one is able or capable to take advantage of good global growth. So we are not really producing anything that the world wants. We're just uncompetitive in the world markets. I mean, it's time to smell the coffee, on that aspect.
Fair enough.
So, just kind of putting it all together, if we have to kind of look at first solve the banking problem, recapitalize the banks, then look at why there are stalled projects. There are infinite number of stalled projects in India. How do you get that going? And then you get revenue streams for the companies. You do, asset management and so on, such that companies start borrowing and investing again into the economy. Ultimately, it comes down to, can you create a mood, an investor-friendly mood in the country? And that comes down to, they're partly psychological in nature, but also about, can you build good enough infrastructure? And so spending on, transfer payments, can you build infrastructure? Capital projects, can you build ports? Can you, improve exports through that way? Ultimately, can you improve the ease of doing business? Can you decrease regulatory burden? Can you decrease the cumbersome labor laws and so on, right? So these are standard prescriptions that I think a lot of economists have given. I'm just, stating it like a parrot again. But I think this is the most urgent scenario where we have to look at these things and kind of do it now.
Okay, so it's back to reforms 2.0.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Anupam, for coming in and painting this dismal picture.
Yeah.
You do come from a dismal science.
Thank you so much for having me over.
Don't leave us just yet. After the break, we'll be discussing India and Afghanistan and whether President Trump actually said something sensible.
In a world where people are busy playing Mendicoat at Diwali parties, 2 men decide to go all in the river.
Don't you mean on the river?
On the river.
Oh, yeah.
2 men will go where no one has ever gone before, to a studio with no air conditioning or Coke Zero to talk about poker.
Hey, order lo na yaar, koi kya hai ye bakwas?
The SpartanPoker.com presents Mera Kaam Poker, hosted by Azim Banatwala.
The best comedian in the world, according to himself.
And Peter Abraham.
Not related to John.
New episodes out every Wednesday on the IBM podcast app or any other podcasting app you use. And for all our listeners who want to try out their hand at poker, you can log on to thespartanpoker.com, register yourself as a user with the promo code IVM, and you will get 200 bonus cash, which you can use to play poker for free. See you at the tables.
Hi, welcome back to the Pragati podcast. I'm currently joined by my co-host Pavan and Pranay Kotasthane. Pranay is the head of geostrategy at the Takshashila Institution. So today we're talking about a region that we generally don't focus on because we talk so much about China. We're talking about Afghanistan. Pranay, Trump recently talked about Afghanistan in his speech, right? What was new in his speech?
Yeah, okay. Ni hao, Hamsini. Hi, Pavan. So, Trump announced a new Afghanistan and South Asia strategy. That's how it is called. So, by the way, it's not a strategy as of yet. All we know as of now is that speech which he gave, which we'll find it on New York Times. No document has been released yet. So, that's just about the information we have, the speech that Trump gave. Okay, so that's important to know. So, now let's know what is new about it. Okay, before I get to the specifically new things in it, it's important to understand what was the backdrop of this speech, right? Because we need to know what was happening in Afghanistan before the speech. So first thing that we need to know is Taliban has been gaining ground in Afghanistan consistently over the last year or so. So the National Unity Government, NUG, which I will refer to henceforth, so NUG has been losing strength. They have not done anything worthwhile which they can project as success. So it's been sort of bad days for Afghanistan. You would have heard about bombings taking place in Kabul with great regularity. So Taliban has been on the ascendance, and that's been bad for Afghanistan.
And all of this happening because Obama announced a withdrawal and we didn't have an idea of where it was going?
That was when sort of Taliban knew that the only thing that they have to do is outlive the American presence. So from then on, Taliban has been gaining strength, but over the last 1 year, it's been terribly bad. Okay, so now the estimate suggests that the NUG only controls around 60% of the territory or so. So rest of it's been Taliban. And you would have heard about Taliban taking a whole city under their control in Kunduz last year. That was the first time after 2001 that they had a big city under their control. So those were significant moves that show that Taliban was gaining strength. So that is one thing. Second thing that happened over the last year was that we had a lot of this distraction with ISIS in Afghanistan, right? So a lot of countries like Russia, Iran and all said that, hey, Taliban is the lesser evil. Let's make some peace deal with them, or let's start talking to them even though they are bad, because the big devil is ISIS, which has already come in Afghanistan. But as of now, there are no substantial links between the ISIS in Syria and the ISIS which we talk about in Afghanistan. The people in Afghanistan are mostly remnants of the TTP and other groups which have come under this banner of ISIS.
The TTP is what exactly?
Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. So
they're basically Afghans who are sort of flying the ISIS flag because they want to.
Yes, because that's the new cool flag, and that gives them more power and the fact that more people will listen to them. So that's the whole idea. So the reason why Trump's this is a backdrop of Trump's strategies now. Given this strategy is again trying to focus more on Taliban rather than getting distracted with all these other issues. So that is an important element of the backdrop. Third thing, and very important one, is Trump himself was of the opinion that they should actually pull out of Afghanistan. So that was what his initial position was, which falls much into his overall strategy of not investing American power where it is not required in his own opinion. So these were sort of the three main elements of the backdrop to this Afghanistan strategy. Now you asked what is the new things here, right? So now with this backdrop in mind, let's see the three new things that have happened. So first thing, this is for the very first time that Americans have directly blamed Pakistan for the things which are happening in Afghanistan at the presidential level. Till now you had things like the highest levels of warning were by Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, when she made that famous remark that snakes in your own backyard can't bite just your neighbors, they can also bite you. So after that, this is the first time that the president has actually gone out and said that Pakistan is responsible for some of the things that are happening in Afghanistan.
And why has America been so reticent to blame Pakistan in the past?
For their own national interest, because they always knew that finally the access to Afghanistan has to come through Pakistan. They were dependent on that. And there was this, the overall US narrative was that you need to have the Pakistan army in your good books for doing anything substantial in Afghanistan.
And this was exactly the decision that was taken in 2001, right? When the United States decided to retaliate and go after Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, Pakistan became the key ally in the war on terror.
The global war on terror, it was the major ally, right?
And ever since then, India has sort of been an outsider to this, maybe playing some sort of a role, but nothing too involved, right? Not as a full ally in the war on terror, sort of.
Yeah. So India has been doing a lot with Afghanistan on the state capacity building, economic development front, but nothing in collaboration with the US, because for once Pakistan was in the equation, it was always a sort of zero-sum game, right? So Pakistan's condition was that we will do things, but then if you get India in, we are out. So that always limited India's role.
So is that possibly changing now?
Yes. So that's the second new thing, right? So one, because it clearly identifies Pakistan as being a part of the problem rather than being a part of the solution, it opens more avenues for India. And not just in an indirect way. In fact, Trump himself said in that speech that they appreciate what has been happening with India and Afghanistan, and they want greater Indian role in economic development of Afghanistan. And in fact, just a couple of days back, India had the Strategic Partnership Council meeting where the two external affairs ministers met. Now, that was part of the Strategic Partnership Agreement, which was a very bold vision by India of Afghanistan, which was signed in 2011. And that constituted this sort of a council where people from business, people from different areas and walks of life from both countries should interact with each other. And this was supposed to be an annual meeting. But this is only the second meeting which has taken place. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the second meeting has taken place after the Trump strategy. So now we finally see things coming in place. And this is actually a sweet spot for India because, India has never been comfortable with arguments that we should put our boots on ground in Afghanistan. But so if security is something that the US can take care of, India is more than happy to do things on the economic front, which it has already been doing so, and it can really scale on that front.
So, and what are the kinds of things that India can do in Afghanistan?
Yeah. So a couple of things more that Trump's strategy is. Why is it different? One thing, it does not put any deadlines on troop withdrawals. Now, this is a big change, right? Earlier, as you know, the Obama strategy was about putting a deadline, and that just helped Taliban. This time, what they have said is the troop levels will only be determined by on-ground situation. So they might increase, decrease, depending on what happens there. So which is a good move. Okay. And second thing, he clearly says that the idea is that US will not be interested so much in nation building in Afghanistan, but their job will be to kill terrorists. And he uses these words, and kill terrorists. Specifically, he mentions Taliban as well, which is again good news given the backdrop I told you about ISIS and the distraction. So that is again something which is positive news, right? So yeah, now going back to your question, how should we say it as Indians, right? So first thing is what US is doing is in its own national interest. Probably that's how they're determined, and there's a strong imprint of the Department of Defense in this. But we have to think about our own national interest, right? In our calculations, a strong, stable Afghan state is really good for India. Okay, so given that a strong, stable Afghan state is required and US is willing to provide the security backbone for it, this is only good news for India, right? Because this is one area where India has some reservations, given that if India gets involved in the security aspect, there will be repercussions from the Pakistani end. So if US can provide the security backbone, it's good news for India.
So, Pranay, considering everything that Trump has said in the speech and what's different about it, what can India do now in Afghanistan?
Yeah. So, a lot of things, as I said, that the strategic partnership agreement gives a really bold vision. So now we'd written an article in Pragati where we put down what are the specific things that we can actually do as part of that strategic partnership agreement. So I'll just probably share some of those ideas. So first thing that it talks about is collaboration on trade and economic cooperation. So on that, some of the things that India can do is, so India has diplomatic presence in 5 cities in Afghanistan. So we were proposing that each of those consulates can do a lot more in terms of economic cooperation. For example, each of the consulates can actually hold a small business incubator, which can connect Afghan entrepreneurs to the business community in India and specifically provide access to credit, know-how, supply chain, etc. It can actually be, a GCPP type of course where you train Afghan entrepreneurs for 3 months, have batches of Afghan entrepreneurs coming out, and you can fly them in for a short course which connects them with Indian entrepreneurs as well. So that is one thing. And this is again low cost. It's not something that will require billions and billions of dollars. The only requirement is security that we hope US will take care of. Second thing is India can actually incentivize companies to invest in Afghanistan, specifically 3 areas: plastics, pharmaceutical packaging, and two-wheeler assembly.
Why these 3 areas?
Yeah, so the major reason is in all these 3 things, Indian companies are pretty good at. So that's one reason where we have a comparative advantage. First 2, that is pharmaceutical packaging and plastics industry, because higher consumption of these goods correlates well with higher rising incomes. So as Afghanistan sort of gains more strength, the consumption of these goods will increase. They require this. They have been saying this from a long time. So it really
even if Afghans want to currently consume paracetamol or something, all these tablets have probably flown in from other countries, so maybe have to come by road through difficult conditions.
Yes, and there are no packaging units at all, so which means that they have to come from outside places.
So even the cost of basic antibiotics and painkillers will be quite high in Afghanistan.
Yes. So that is one major problem, right? And two-wheeler assembly, because just two-wheeler assembly will have a lot of ancillary units also coming up, and the number of jobs that per unit growth which are generated from a two-wheeler plant are a lot more. So, and jobs are a big problem there. So it helps again. And of course, Indian companies are good at it. So we can do things there. So that's the second part that I think India can do substantial things there. Third thing is, as you know, we've been conducting this course for Afghan students as well. And the big problem is internet there. Right. So India, and again, Indian companies are really good at laying dense optical fiber networks in India. So again, we can incentivize Indian companies to do the same in cities of Afghanistan, if not all the places. Right? So that is these are 3 things. The most important part is the Chabahar port. Now that is one big problem, because again, Afghanistan is dependent on the route through Pakistan, and Pakistan is not going to take this Trump's strategy lying down. What they are, remember in 2011, they had threatened that they were going to close the NATO supply routes from Karachi to Afghanistan. I foresee that they might do something like that now as well. Which
so
means,
the Chabahar port, just as a background, is in Iran.
Yes.
Right? And India also recently said that they were going to invest in it.
Yeah, India has invested. India is the major partner with Iran in this. But till now, it has not achieved the scale that we wanted. And also the road from Chabahar to Afghanistan, and then the linkage from that road to the Garland route in Afghanistan is still not happened. So some infrastructure work still needs to be done. The big problem there is it requires Iran cooperation, and Trump is going ballistic on Iran. So it will be very tough for India to balance and convince the Trump administration that Chabahar is really good for Afghanistan. And if he wants a strategy to succeed, this is an important project to be done. So these are areas in trade and economic cooperation where India can do a lot of things. Now let me go to the next part. Yeah, on capacity development and education. Yeah, now this, Pavan, this was a question for you as well. So why don't you, like, we have IITs, NITs, etc. Why can't we have Afghanistan Institutes of Technologies, which are sort of mentored by IITs and NITs in India? This was one of the things that we were thinking, because higher education is very important for state capacity, and we have institutions which we have built. In fact, we have also been able to build them because of help given by other countries. So we can use that model and do something in Afghanistan as well. So
Absolutely. I think the key challenge or block, at least if not in the Indian government, but in the Indian public, is that in general, Afghanistan is an unsafe place where you don't want to go. Right. So for any such cooperation to happen, will a professor from an NIT or an IIT just be willing to fly down to Kabul to, say, meet people? If even that doesn't happen, then I think any such ideas are in trouble.
Right.
Because people are happy flying out of Afghanistan, but not very happy flying in.
Right.
But the whole point of the Trump speech is that this equation is supposed to change, right? We're looking at these ideas saying that if the US can act as a net security provider, then these are the sort of ideas that we can implement.
Sure, but probably the security has to be provided first, then mindsets change that, hey, maybe Afghanistan is a tourist destination. I think it needs to get all the way there before, people in the public. I mean, right now, tell someone in your family that you will be going to Afghanistan for a month. They'll lose their head, right? And they'll probably write you off, do your final rites before you go. So I think that's one key bottleneck that I think Trump cannot wave a magic wand and fix. And at a time when Taliban is taking over so much territory, there are so many incidents happening, I think people will be very wary.
Yeah. So the way I was thinking about this is, one thing is Kabul still is sort of a place which people know of in the Indian imagination. So if someone says, I want to go to Kabul, it is still relatively more safer than saying, if you say Jalalabad or something like that. But another thing was, like, you have this American university in Kabul itself, and they have been able to do it. What I would suggest is, it doesn't need Indian professors to go there on a regular basis. So professors could be the Afghans itself. Of course, it would need really occasional visits there, and most of our courses can be delivered through VSATs, etc. Right, and we have done that earlier. So it could be sort of a mentoring institution. Like IIT can be a mentoring institution for IIT, AIT, and AIM similarly for management as well. And start off with Kabul itself instead of other cities, and then see how it goes from other places, and minimize travel if that's the concern.
Right. Another idea could be that, Afghans can without too much difficulty go north, right, into Kazakhstan and Tajikistan and other neighboring countries. And these are very safe countries where, there isn't really too much trouble. So if someone wants to set up, say, a campus or something, they need not necessarily set it up in unsafe Afghanistan, but across the border. And as time progresses, they can always open a new building in Kabul and slowly expand.
Yeah.
And so the benefit needs to be for the Afghan people rather than for the Afghan territory.
Yeah, I agree. But when we wrote this, a lot of people suggested that, IITs is something which is strategic, that model is strategic, and why we have been reluctant to export it. I think that's too old now. And there's nothing in IITs that we shouldn't be talking about and propagating it elsewhere. So, yeah. And okay, then let's go to what are the other things on the capacity development front. Yeah, public health is a big problem in Afghanistan again. So again, as we said, in all areas where India has a diplomatic presence, we should sort of be able to say that an Indian consulate is a package which comes with a lot of other things like education, with like industry, and even healthcare. So in fact, the latest meeting between the two external affairs ministers of India and Afghanistan, they were talking about a polyclinic being built in Mazar-e-Sharif, which is good news. That's something which we had also written about. A lot of more smaller clinics and hospitals are really something which Afghans are looking for forward to, and they always talk about the hospital that India has put up earlier. So that is also something which India can do, and India has expertise in doing telemedicine or using other methods to do basic public health. That's
the other thing probably that India should do is the reverse. India enjoys by and large a good reputation in Afghanistan. Most Afghans
very good, very positive.
like India, watch Indian movies, TV serials, so they sort of understand Indian culture in a certain way and appreciate it. But the reverse isn't true. You know? I mean, even now the mental image of Kabul is a bombed out building, just after 2001. But it's been actually 16 years since then. Kabul has been rebuilt.
Yeah.
It's a thriving city. It holds more than 20% of Afghan population?
Must be.
So it's a huge center, and with all of its problems, but we don't know that Afghanistan in India.
Yeah.
So I think public diplomacy might play a big role both ways to sort of familiarize the two countries with each other.
Yeah, totally agree. There was this Kabuliwaala story long time back, right? After that, we have had very famous actors born in Afghanistan, Kader Khan, for example, and others. But after that, we've sort of lost track of that country at all. And if it is so important strategically for India to have good ties with Afghanistan, and it's our neighbor, right? And then it is important that there should be public diplomacy so that we know more about the country.
Yeah,
Totally
this makes me think just anecdotally, when I was in Warsaw last year, I met an Afghan guy and we were just talking about like Bollywood, and he told me that his favorite actor was Sunil Shetty, and he was like, one day I'm going to come to India and I'm going to meet Sunil Shetty. And then he said, oh, have you seen any Afghan movies? Do you know anything about Afghan actors? And then I realized I had no clue. And that's when I realized that this reciprocity of public diplomacy should be important, particularly with Afghanistan.
All right. Thanks, Pranay. So that was our little bit on what India can expect to do or can possibly plan to do in Afghanistan over the coming years. Thanks for coming in, Pranay.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the 14th episode of the Pragati podcast. Get the best takes on public affairs, economics and politics at thinkpragati.com. If you can think of any topics that you'd like us to talk about on the Pragati podcast, send us a message on Twitter and Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe either. We are pretty much there on every single platform.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Sorry to say, but there's been a slight delay due to the apocalypse having suddenly begun. As you can see, there's death, destruction, and chaos taking place all around us. But don't you worry, food and drinks will be served shortly, and I would recommend checking out
IVM Podcasts
to get some of your favorite Indian podcasts. We'll keep you going till this whole thing blows over. Thank you.